The money my grandmother saved for me over 30 years was gone in a single afternoon, and nobody in my family thought they owed me an explanation. I found out the way you find out about most painful things in life, not from the people who did it, but by accident, at the wrong moment, in a room where I was not supposed to be standing. My sister was showing off her new car in the driveway, and my mother was clapping like it was the proudest moment of her life. I stood by the door watching them, and something felt off. Something felt like a number I had counted before and could not find anymore. Then my father turned around and saw my face, and the look he gave me was not guilt. It was impatience, like I was the problem. Like I was standing in the wrong place at the wrong time by asking a silent question with my eyes. That was the moment I understood that the money my grandmother had set aside for me, the money she had told me about herself, the money she had worked and saved and protected for decades, had already been spent. On my sister, on a car, without a single word to me. And the people who were supposed to love me most in this world were standing in the driveway hoping I would just go back inside and not ruin the celebration. Before this story goes any further, I want to ask you something. If you found out today that the people closest to you had taken something that belonged to you, something that was promised to you, something that was protected for you, and spent it on someone else without even telling you, what would you do first? Would you confront them? Would you stay quiet and wait? Would you call someone? Would you just leave? Think about that while you listen, because Emily had to answer that question in real time, with no warning, no preparation, and no one in that house on her side. Emily was 29 years old when the floor fell out from under her life, and the strangest part was that it happened on a Tuesday. Not a holiday, not a birthday, not any kind of special occasion. Just a regular Tuesday in October when the leaves were turning and the air had that first cold edge that made you want to stay inside. Emily had driven to her parents' house that afternoon to drop off some groceries for her mother, who had been dealing with a bad knee and struggling to get around the store easily. That was the kind of person Emily was. She did not wait to be asked. She noticed what people needed and she showed up. She had been doing that her whole life. Emily was the older of two daughters. She was 29. Her sister Natalie was 24. Emily had a small apartment 20 minutes from her parents' house, a job she had worked hard for as a project coordinator at a mid-sized logistics company, and a life she had built mostly on her own. She had paid for her own college. She had paid for her own first car, a used sedan she bought with money she saved working weekends during her last year of school. She had never asked her parents for anything significant, not because they were unable to help, but because she had learned early that asking created tension. Natalie never seemed to learn the same lesson, or maybe Natalie had just never needed to. Natalie was the younger one, the louder one, the one whose problems always seemed more urgent, whose needs always seemed more immediate. Natalie had dropped out of college after one semester. She had started 2 businesses that went nowhere. She had moved back home twice. She had borrowed money from their parents regularly and paid it back irregularly, and their parents had never seemed to mind. Emily had noticed this pattern for years and had mostly kept her feelings about it private. She told herself it was not her business. She told herself every family dynamic was different. She told herself that what her parents did with their money was their own choice, and she had no right to have opinions about it. She had been wrong about one thing. She had assumed that her parents' money and her inheritance were 2 entirely separate things. She had never imagined those lines could be crossed. Her grandmother, Margaret, was her father's mother. Margaret was 81 years old and had been in a hospice care facility for 3 months following a stroke that had left her unable to live on her own. Emily visited her every week without fail, sometimes twice a week. She brought her the same ginger tea she had always liked, and she sat with her and held her hand and listened to the same stories she had heard 50 times before, and she never once made her grandmother feel like a burden. Margaret noticed. Margaret had always noticed. Years before the stroke, when Emily was in her early 20s, Margaret had sat her down at the kitchen table in her small house and told her something directly. She said she had been putting money aside for Emily for a long time. She said she had started when Emily was just a few years old, every birthday, every Christmas, every time. She had a little extra. She said she had spoken to Emily's father about it, and that the account was set up properly, and that when the time came, when Emily was ready to buy a home, or start something, or needed a foundation under her feet, the money would be there. She did not tell Emily the exact amount. She said it was enough to matter. She said it was a gift from her to the granddaughter who had always shown up. Emily had hugged her and cried quietly and told her she did not need to do that. Margaret had patted her hand and said she knew Emily did not need her to, and that was exactly why she had. Emily had thought about that conversation many times over the years, not obsessively, not with greed, but with the quiet warmth of knowing that someone had seen her. Someone had noticed the work she put in, the choices she made, the way she carried herself, and had decided to honor that. It was not just about the money. It was about being seen. That was the thing that mattered most. So when Emily stood in her parents' driveway that Tuesday in October and watched Natalie spin around the key fob of a brand new car, a white compact SUV with the paper dealer tag still in the window, and saw her mother's face full of pride and her father's wide smile, and felt something in her stomach turn cold, she was not immediately certain what she was feeling. She told herself she was overreacting. She told herself Natalie must have saved up. She told herself there was a reasonable explanation. She went inside. She put the groceries away. She made herself a glass of water and stood at the kitchen counter and tried to breathe normally. Her mother came in a few minutes later, still glowing, and said, "Isn't it wonderful?" And Emily nodded and said yes and asked where Natalie had gotten the money for a new car. Her mother's face did a small thing, a flicker, just for a second, and then her mother said your father helped her out a little and turned to open the refrigerator. Emily set her glass down on the counter. She said, "What do you mean, helped her out?" Her mother said your father had some money saved and Natalie needed reliable transportation for her new job, and it just made sense. Emily stood very still. She said, "Was any of that money Grandma Margaret's?" And this time the pause was longer. Her mother closed the refrigerator and turned around and looked at her with the expression she used when she wanted something to go away. She said it was your father's money to manage, Emily, and that was all she said. Emily drove home that afternoon in a silence so heavy it felt physical. She did not cry. She did not call anyone. She sat in her apartment and went through what she knew, what she suspected, and what she needed to find out before she could do anything else. She knew her grandmother had set money aside. She knew her father was the one who managed the account. She knew her parents had just bought Natalie a car. She did not know yet how much, from where, or whether what she suspected was actually what had happened. But she felt it. She felt it the way you feel the specific shape of a truth before you have all the evidence to confirm it. She called her father that evening. He answered on the second ring and sounded slightly too casual, slightly too ready for the conversation, which told her he had been expecting it. She asked him directly. She said, "Dad, I need you to tell me honestly whether any of the money Grandma Margaret set aside for me was used to buy Natalie's car." There was a pause. He said, "Emily, you need to understand the full picture." She said she was asking him a yes or no question. He said it was more complicated than that. That was his yes. He went on to explain. He said the account had been technically in his name as custodian. He said Margaret had talked to him years ago about the money, but that circumstances had changed. He said Natalie was at a turning point in her life and needed real help, and the timing had worked out, and he had made a decision as her parent. He said Emily was stable and doing well, and she did not need the money right now the way Natalie did. He said he had meant to talk to Emily about it before, but it had just never felt like the right time. He said he hoped Emily could understand where he was coming from. He said family meant helping each other when it mattered. He said he knew Emily was generous and would want her sister to have what she needed. Emily listened to all of it. She let him finish. Then she said one sentence. She said, "Dad, that money was not yours to spend," and she ended the call. She did not sleep much that night. She lay in bed and stared at the ceiling and thought about her grandmother. She thought about that kitchen table conversation and the specific way Margaret had said it was enough to matter. She thought about every time she had driven to that hospice facility with ginger tea and sat for 2 hours holding an old woman's hand, not because anyone had asked her to, but because she genuinely loved her. She thought about Natalie, who Emily could count on one hand how many times she had visited Margaret since the stroke. She thought about the car in the driveway with the paper tag still on it. She thought about her father's voice, explaining why the decision had been reasonable. She thought about her mother closing the refrigerator door. She also thought about money. Not in an abstract way, but in the specific way of a 29-year-old woman who lived alone and paid rent and had a car payment and student loans, and had been quietly, carefully, slowly building toward the idea of one day having enough of a down payment to stop renting. That account her grandmother had been building had been somewhere in the back of her mind as a future anchor. Not something she planned to take tomorrow, but something she had counted on existing. Something that had been promised to her by the person who built it, and now it was gone, spent on a car, and she had not been told. The next morning, Emily did something she almost never did. She took a day off work. She spent the morning writing down everything she remembered about the original conversation with her grandmother. The year, the words Margaret had used, the fact that Margaret had mentioned Emily's father by name and said it was set up properly. She wrote down what her father had said on the phone. She wrote down the timeline as best she could reconstruct it. She did not know yet what she was going to do with any of it, but she needed it in order. She needed to see the shape of the thing clearly before she could decide what to do next. That afternoon, she drove to the hospice. Margaret was having a good day, which in the context of Margaret's current life meant she was awake and oriented and able to hold a real conversation. Emily set the ginger tea on the bedside table and sat down and took her grandmother's hand, and for a few minutes they talked about nothing in particular. The weather. The bird feeder outside the window. Margaret mentioned a nurse whose name she kept forgetting. Emily smiled and listened and waited. Then she told her, not in a dramatic way, not with tears, though she felt them behind her eyes. She just told her grandmother what she had found out, calmly, factually, without embellishment. She told her about the car. She told her about the conversation with her father. She told her about her mother closing the refrigerator door. She told her that she was not sure what to do and that she had come because she did not know who else to talk to and because she needed to know what Margaret actually wanted. Margaret listened without interrupting. Her face went very still. It was not the stillness of confusion. It was the stillness of someone who was processing something painful and deciding what they were going to do about it. After a long moment, she asked one question. She asked Emily whether her father had transferred the money or spent it. Emily said she did not know the exact details, but she believed it was transferred and spent. Margaret was quiet for another long moment. Then she said she needed to make a phone call. She said Emily should wait outside for a few minutes. Emily stepped into the hallway and stood by the window and watched the parking lot below and listened to the sound of the facility around her. After about 15 minutes, a nurse opened the door and said Emily could come back in. Margaret was sitting up straighter. Her expression had settled into something Emily recognized from childhood, from moments when her grandmother had made up her mind about something, and that was simply the end of the matter. Margaret told Emily that she had called her attorney. His name was Gerald Hartman, and he had been her lawyer for over 20 years. She said she had been meaning to update some things in her documents for a while, and she was going to do it now. She said she wanted Emily to know that whatever could be corrected would be corrected, and whatever could not be undone would be accounted for in another way. She said she was sorry that this had happened. She said she was sorry she had trusted the account to Emily's father without building in more protection. She said she had believed he would do right by his daughter, and she had been wrong, and that was partly her fault, and she was going to do what she could to fix it. She squeezed Emily's hand. She said nobody gets to decide what is enough for you except you. Emily drove home with her hands steady on the wheel and her eyes blurring twice, once on the highway on-ramp, and once when she pulled into her parking spot and turned off the engine and just sat there. She was not crying from sadness exactly. She was crying because someone had seen her again. Because in a world where her own parents had looked at her and decided she was stable enough to take from, her grandmother had looked at her from a hospice bed and decided to fix it. Over the next several days, Emily did not contact her parents. She did not call Natalie. She went to work. She came home. She visited Margaret twice more. She spoke briefly with Gerald Hartman, who confirmed that he had received instructions from Margaret and was in the process of updating her documents. He could not share the specific contents with Emily, but he told her that Margaret was clear-minded and cert, and that the changes were being made with full legal care. Emily thanked him and asked no more questions. She went back to her life and she waited. Her parents, meanwhile, seemed to believe the situation had resolved itself. Her father had sent her a text message 2 days after their phone call. The message said he hoped she understood his reasoning and that family always came first, and that he knew she was the kind of person who could see the bigger picture. Emily did not respond to the text. Her mother called once and left a voicemail saying that Natalie was very happy with the car and that it was going to make such a difference in her life and that Emily should come for dinner soon. Emily listened to the voicemail twice, then deleted it and did not call back. Natalie herself sent a text 3 days after the car had appeared in the driveway. It said, "Thanks for being cool about everything, Em. I know it's kind of awkward, but you know how things are." Emily stared at that text for a long time. Thanks for being cool. She did not know what she had done that could be interpreted as being cool about anything. She had not said it was fine. She had not given anyone permission. She had simply gone quiet. And somehow her family had read her silence as acceptance, as forgiveness, as the green light they needed to feel comfortable again. They had mistaken her restraint for agreement. That was a mistake they had made many times before. Emily saved the text message. She saved everything. She had started keeping records with the same careful energy she brought to her work, the same organized attention she used when tracking a project with too many moving parts and not enough accountability. About 2 weeks after the hospice visit, Emily's father called again. His tone was different this time, less casual. He asked if Emily had spoken to Grandma Margaret recently. Emily said yes, she visited every week, he knew that. He said had she talked to her about the money. Emily said she had told her grandmother what had happened. Yes. There was a pause. Her father said he wished she had come to him first before going to his mother. Emily said she had come to him first, and he had explained his reasoning and she had disagreed with it. He said Margaret was not in the best state to be worrying about financial matters, and it was not fair to upset her. Emily said very calmly that her grandmother had seemed perfectly clear-minded and had made her own decision about what she wanted to do. Her father said, "Emily, I hope you haven't stirred something up that can't be taken back." Emily said she hoped so too, and she ended the call. Her father called again that evening. Then her mother called. Then both of them called together, which Emily knew because the caller ID showed her childhood home number instead of either of their cell phones, which meant they were both sitting in the living room using the landline like it was 2003, and this was a family meeting by telephone. Emily did not pick up. She let it go to voicemail. Her mother's voice said, "Emily, we really need to talk about this," and her father's voice in the background said, "Tell her it's important." Emily saved the voicemail and poured herself a glass of water and watched a documentary about ocean tides until she felt calm enough to sleep. What happened next came from a direction Emily had not fully anticipated, though in another way it made complete sense. Gerald Hartman had not only updated Margaret's personal documents, he had also done something else at Margaret's instruction. He had sent a formal letter to Emily's father. Not to the family, not to Emily. Specifically to Emily's father as the named custodian of the original account. The letter outlined that Margaret had become aware that funds from an account she had established for Emily's benefit had been redirected without Emily's knowledge or consent. The letter further stated that Margaret had taken legal steps to ensure that the value of those funds would be reflected in her updated estate documents, and that Margaret's attorney was prepared to pursue any available remedies should there be additional mismanagement of any assets connected to Margaret's estate or intentions. Emily's father received that letter on a Thursday morning. By Thursday afternoon, Emily's phone was ringing again, and this time the calls were not from the landline in the living room. They were from her father's personal cell phone. She let the first one go. She let the second one go. On the third call, she picked up. Her father sounded different. The casual explanation voice was gone. The reasoning and bigger picture language was gone. He sounded like someone who had just realized the thing he had done quietly in private had a shape that other people could see and hold and point to. He said, "Emily, I need to talk to you." She said she was listening. He said the lawyer's letter was unnecessary and that this didn't need to go anywhere official and that he and Emily's mother had been talking and they were willing to work something out. Emily said, "What kind of something?" He said they could put some money aside, start replacing what had been used, do it over time, make it right. Emily said how much had been used. He paused. She said she needed to know the actual number. He paused again and then told her. The amount was larger than she had prepared herself for. She had been telling herself not to assume the worst number. She had been holding on to some version of this story where it was a partial withdrawal, a piece of the account, something that stung but could be contextualized. It was not that. Nearly all of it was gone. Spent across several months, she realized now, not just on the car, but in pieces before the car, the car being simply the final and most visible expenditure. Her father, in the fumbling way of someone trying to make a truth sound more acceptable by surrounding it with context, explained that there had been other things for Natalie before the car. A deposit on an apartment, some medical bills, a loan that Natalie had asked for and never repaid because she had said she couldn't, and the car, all from the same account, all without telling Emily. All justified each time with the same logic that Emily was stable and doing well and would understand. She did not yell, she did not cry on the phone. She said she understood the number now, and she thanked him for telling her, and she said she would be in touch. She ended the call and sat down on her kitchen floor and stayed there for a while, not because she was falling apart, but because she needed gravity. She needed to feel the ground under her and breathe and be completely still before she did anything else. She thought about all the years of being the stable one, all the years of not asking, all the years of her parents reading her self-sufficiency as permission to need her less, to give her less, to protect her less. She thought about the quiet math of being dependable in a family where dependability was rewarded with neglect. She had made it easy for them to forget her. She had worked so hard and kept her life so organized and needed so little that they had eventually started treating her needs as optional. They had not seen her financial future as something that required protection. They had seen it as a resource, because Emily would be fine. Emily was always fine. Emily could handle it. She stayed on the floor for about 20 minutes. Then she got up. She washed her face. She sat down at her desk and opened her laptop and started a document. At the top, she wrote the date and the amount her father had confirmed. Then she wrote everything in order from the beginning. She was not planning a legal case. She was not calling a lawyer that night. She was simply making sure she had everything recorded clearly, in her own words, with dates and amounts and exact quotes from conversations wherever she could remember them. She was treating her own story the way she treated every project at work. She was building the file. Natalie called the following weekend. Emily almost did not answer, but something made her pick up. Natalie's voice was different from their parents' voices. There was no strategy in it. Natalie just sounded guilty in the messy, genuine way of someone who had not thought carefully enough about something they had already done. She said she knew about the letter from the lawyer. She said she had not known where the money came from, not all of it, not in that way. She said their dad had just said he had money put aside and he wanted to help her, and she had not asked enough questions. She said she was sorry. She said she knew sorry was not enough, but she meant it. Emily listened to all of this. She believed parts of it. She believed Natalie had probably not known the specific source of the money. She did not believe Natalie had zero sense that something was off, because Natalie was not a stupid person. But she also knew that when someone offers you a thing you need, and you are struggling, and the person offering it has authority over you, you sometimes make the choice not to look too carefully at where it came from. She understood that in a human way. It did not make her angry at Natalie in the same way she was angry at her parents. Her parents had made an active decision to take what was Emily's and give it to someone else and say nothing. Natalie had made a passive decision to receive something without asking enough questions. Those were different things. Still painful, but different. She told Natalie she heard her. She told her. She was not going to pretend everything was fine because it was not fine. She told her she did not want to destroy their relationship, but she also could not go back to acting like this was something small. She told Natalie she needed some space, and she needed Natalie to give her that without pressure. Natalie said okay. Natalie said whatever Emily needed. Emily thanked her and said goodbye and ended the call. The following week, Emily called Gerald Hartman. Not because she was initiating legal action, but because she wanted to understand what options existed and what her grandmother's updated documents actually meant for the longer-term picture. Gerald was professional and measured. He said he could not share the specific details of Margaret's documents with Emily, but that Margaret had been very intentional and that the updates would speak for themselves when the time came. He said in terms of what had already been spent, recovery would depend on whether Emily's father was willing to make restitution voluntarily or whether Emily wanted to pursue a formal claim. He said the original account had been a gift account with informal documentation, which made a legal recovery complicated but not impossible. He said he was happy to advise her further if she wanted to retain him for that purpose. Emily said she needed to think about it and would be back in touch. She also did something else that week. She went to a financial planner. not a big firm, just a recommended independent advisor named Karen, a woman in her mid-50s who came recommended by a colleague. Emily sat across from her and laid out the entire situation clearly: the numbers, the account, the amount spent, the current state of her savings, her income, her existing debts. She did not tell it as a drama, she told it as data. Karen listened and asked clarifying questions, and at the end she said two things that Emily held onto. She said first that Emily's financial position was genuinely stronger than many people her age, which Emily had not let herself fully see. And second, that the loss, while real and significant, was not the end of the path Emily was on. It was a detour someone else had taken her on without asking. Karen said Emily's job now was to build her own plan with the information she actually had, not the plan she had been counting on from the outside. She said Emily needed to stop measuring her future against the account that was gone and start measuring it against what she was actively building. Emily drove home from that meeting feeling something she had not expected to feel. She felt capable, not because anything had been fixed, but because she had looked at her actual situation clearly without the weight of what she had lost coloring everything dark, and she had seen that she was not starting from nothing. She was starting from somewhere real that she had built herself, and she was going to keep building. That clarity changed the way she handled the next conversation with her parents. They had been reaching out regularly, alternating between guilt and practicality, offering to start some kind of repayment plan, floating the idea of sitting down as a family and talking it through, suggesting that Emily was holding a grudge in a way that was hurting everyone, including herself. Emily had been letting their messages accumulate without responding. She was not doing it to punish them. She was doing it because she had not been ready to talk until she understood what she actually wanted. She invited them to coffee, neutral location, a cafe near her apartment on a Saturday morning. She arrived first, got a table in the back corner, ordered her coffee and a glass of water, and opened her notebook to the document she had been building. When they arrived, they came in together, which she had expected. Her mother was wearing the expression of someone braced for an uncomfortable situation. Her father was wearing the expression of someone who had prepared remarks. They sat down. They ordered. There were a few minutes of brittle small talk about the drive over and the parking. Then Emily told them she wanted to talk, and she needed them to listen first and respond after she had finished. She was calm. She was specific. She said she wanted to tell them what had happened from her perspective, not as an accusation, but as a description. She said she needed them to understand what had actually occurred because she had a feeling they had both been processing it in a way that softened it, and she wanted them to hear it directly. She talked for about 12 minutes. She told them about the original conversation with Margaret at the kitchen table. She told them what she had built her quiet hopes around over the years. She told them exactly how she had found out, which was by accident in their own driveway, from a car with paper tags still in the window. She told them what she had said to her father on the phone and what he had said back. She told them the amount, which made her mother's face do something complicated. She told them she had visited a financial planner and understood her situation clearly. She told them she was not in a crisis and she was not going to fall apart. But she was also not going to pretend this had not happened or that it had been a reasonable decision. She told them that the money had not been theirs to spend. She told them that what they had done was take a promise someone else had made to her and redirect it without telling her, without asking her, without even leaving her the dignity of being informed. She told them that the explanation, which was that she was stable and Natalie needed it more, was not a reason it had been right to do. It was a reason they had felt comfortable doing it, and those were different things. Then she told them what she expected going forward. She was not demanding legal action. She was not cutting them off permanently. She was not telling them she never wanted to see them again. She was telling them clearly and specifically that she expected them to begin making repayment, not as a favor, not as a gesture, but as an acknowledgement that what had been taken was real and what had been broken was real, and that rebuilding required action, not just apology. She said she also needed them to understand that her relationship with them going forward would be different, not hostile, but different. She was no longer going to be the one who showed up every time without being asked, the one who needed nothing, the one whose stability they could borrow against. She was going to take care of herself first, and she needed them to understand that this was not a punishment. It was just the truth. Her father started to respond, and she could tell from the first two words that he was going to reach for a justification, and she looked at him calmly and said she needed him to just sit with what she had said before he responded. He stopped. He looked at the table. He was quiet for a long time. Then he said he was sorry. Not in the voice he had been using in his recent phone calls, the careful problem management sorry. Just quietly at the table, looking at his coffee. He said he had not thought through what it would mean to her. He said he had looked at her self-sufficiency and made a decision that had not been his to make, and he was sorry. It was not everything she needed. It was not the beginning of a fixed relationship. But it was real, and she could tell it was real, and she filed it away carefully. Her mother was harder. Her mother's version of sorry was wrapped in justifications and ended with a reminder that Natalie really had needed help and that Emily was so strong and capable, and didn't she think that was actually a kind of compliment in a way? Emily looked at her mother and said that strength was not consent, that needing less did not mean deserving less. That she had never been given the choice about whether to give Natalie that money, and if she had been given the choice, the answer would have been no, and they had both known that, which was exactly why she had never been asked. Her mother was quiet after that. They left the cafe with no grand resolution, no tearful hugging scene, no dramatic reversal. Her father said he would look into what a repayment arrangement could look like. Her mother said she needed some time to process. Emily said she would be in touch. She walked back to her apartment alone and stood in her kitchen for a minute with the window open, listening to the street sounds below. She felt tired in the deep, steady way of someone who has finally finished carrying something they have been carrying too long. Not relieved exactly, not happy, but lighter, like a weight had been redistributed from her shoulders to the table where it belonged. About 3 weeks after the cafe conversation, Gerald Hartman called Emily directly. He said that Margaret had asked him to share something with Emily and that Margaret had given him specific permission to do so. He said that Margaret's updated estate documents included a specific provision for Emily that significantly exceeded the original account amount that had been spent. He said Margaret had been explicit in her instructions that this provision was protected, non-negotiable, and had been structured in a way that could not be redirected by any other party. He said Margaret had also left a letter for Emily, sealed, to be delivered when the time came. He said Margaret wanted Emily to know that she had heard her and she was sorry and she had done what she could. Emily said thank you. She said thank her. He said he would. She visited Margaret the next day. Margaret looked small in the hospice bed, smaller than she had the first time Emily had brought her ginger tea, but her eyes were the same. Steady. Clear. She knew what had happened and she knew what she had done about it, and she was at peace with both. They talked for a long time that afternoon about things that had not to do with money. They talked about a garden Margaret had kept when she was younger. They talked about a dog Emily had loved as a child. They talked about the way the light came through the hospice window in the late afternoon and made the room feel warmer than it was. Margaret fell asleep while Emily was still sitting there, and Emily stayed for another hour, just in case. In the months that followed, Emily's parents did begin making payments. Not large ones, but consistent ones, which Emily had not fully expected. Her father, she came to understand, was genuinely more ashamed of himself than he had ever been able to say clearly in the moment of confrontation. The shame was working on him in the background and producing slow action, which was not the same as an emotional breakthrough, but was something she could work with. Her mother remained more defended, more inclined to frame everything around Natalie's struggles and less inclined to look directly at what she had done to Emily. Emily had stopped expecting more from her mother than what her mother was capable of giving. That was its own kind of peace. Natalie, for her part, did something Emily had not anticipated. She got a second job. She told Emily about it in a low-key text message that said she was working weekends now, and she was going to start putting something aside, and she wanted to eventually contribute to paying Emily back too, and she hoped that was okay to say. Emily texted back and said it was okay to say, and she appreciated it. It was not a reconciliation. It was a beginning of something that might become one slowly, with time and action. Emily's own life continued to move. She got a promotion at work, not because of anything dramatic, but because she had been quietly excellent for 2 years and her manager had finally made it official. She started contributing more to her savings. She had a real conversation with Karen, the financial planner, about what a realistic timeline for a down payment looked like now, with her actual numbers. And the timeline was longer than she had hoped but genuinely possible, and that was enough to keep her moving. She kept visiting Margaret. She kept bringing the ginger tea. She thought a lot during those months about what it meant to be the dependable one in a family, about how dependability, when it goes unrecognized long enough, starts to get treated like a natural resource. People stop being grateful for it because they have stopped noticing it. It just exists, like water from a tap. They reach for it without thinking about where it comes from or what it costs to keep it flowing. And then, when the tap runs dry or the person maintaining it finally says, "I need something too," the people who have been drinking from it are shocked. Not because they are necessarily bad people, but because they had stopped seeing a person and started seeing a function. Emily had spent years being a function, the reliable one, the one who did not need to be asked, the one who showed up, who managed, who handled things, who never made a scene. And the people around her had been glad to let her be that, because it made their lives easier and it cost them nothing. Until it cost them something. Until the woman behind the function looked up and said no, and meant it, and did not apologize for meaning it. She was 30 years old now. She had passed her birthday 2 months after the cafe conversation, a quiet birthday she spent with 2 close friends she trusted and a long walk along the river near her apartment. She had not invited her family. Her father had sent a card and a check, which she had deposited without ceremony. Her mother had sent flowers, which she had put in the window. Natalie had sent a voice memo, which was just 40 seconds of her saying happy birthday, and she loved her, and she was thinking about her. And Emily had listened to it twice and found it more moving than she would have predicted. She was building something now, not just financially. She was building a version of her life that was held together by her own decisions, her own priorities, her own judgment about who deserved her time and trust and presence. She was learning the difference between family loyalty and family performance. Loyalty was something real, something that showed up in action over time. Performance was showing up to every event, answering every call, absorbing every guilt trip, staying quiet at every table where she was being discussed and never told. She had spent years in the performance. She was done with that now. The relationship with her parents did not break completely. She was not sure she wanted it to. There was something real between her and her father, underneath the mistake, something she could still feel when he called on an ordinary Tuesday just to check in without agenda. She was cautious with him now. She was slower to trust. But she had not closed the door. Her mother was harder. Her mother had still not fully acknowledged what had happened in a direct and undefended way, and Emily had accepted that this might be the limit of what her mother could do, and she had stopped pushing for more. That acceptance was its own form of grief, but it was also a kind of relief. She did not have to keep waiting for something that was not coming. What Margaret had done from her hospice bed was something Emily turned over in her mind often. Not the practical piece, though the practical piece mattered. The act of it. The fact that an 81-year-old woman, sick and small and tired, had heard the truth and immediately asked for her phone and called her lawyer and done what she could. She had not said it was complicated. She had not said this is a family matter and we should handle it quietly. She had said, "I need to make a call." She had used the time and energy she had left to do something specific and real for the granddaughter she loved. And she had done it without making Emily ask, without making Emily beg, without making Emily prove she deserved it. She had just done it because she had seen Emily clearly and she had known it was right. Emily thought about that a lot, about the difference between being seen and being managed, about how rare it was to have someone in your life who responded to the truth of your situation without first calculating the cost to themselves. Margaret had been that for her, consistently, across her whole life. And Emily was determined to carry that forward, not just to receive it, to offer it, to be that kind of clear-sighted witness for the people she chose to keep close. To never be the person who looked at someone's pain and first thought about how it would inconvenience them to acknowledge it. She was in the hospice waiting room one afternoon, a few months after the attorney's call, when a nurse came out and touched her arm and said her grandmother had taken a turn and she should come in. Emily went in and sat with her and held her hand and stayed until it was over. She did not let go until she needed to. She told her, in a quiet voice, that she understood, that she was proud of her, that she loved her, that she had been so lucky to have her. She did not know whether Margaret could hear her by the end. She chose to believe she could. The letter arrived 3 weeks later, through Gerald Hartman's office. Emily sat down at her kitchen table with a cup of tea and opened it carefully. It was 2 pages, handwritten in Margaret's slightly unsteady script, on the pale blue paper Margaret had always used for her personal correspondence. It began with her name. It said, "Dear Emily." And then Margaret told her all the things she had apparently wanted to say for a long time but had not found the moment for. She said she had watched Emily her whole life and had been proud of her in a way she had not always said out loud. She said she had always known, that Emily was the kind of person who would keep showing up even when no one was looking. She said that quality was rare and it was worth protecting. She said she was sorry the family had taken advantage of it. She said she hoped Emily knew that being quietly strong did not mean she was required to be quietly sacrificed. She said she wanted Emily to take the money and use it for something that was only hers, something she chose because she wanted it, not because it was practical or safe or what anyone else needed from her. She said she hoped Emily would be happy. She said she was sure she would be. She said she would have liked more time. She said she loved her very much. Emily read it twice. Then she folded it back along its original lines and put it in the front of the notebook where she had been keeping records since October. She closed the notebook. She sat at the table for a long time. She was not going to be fine in the quick, uncomplicated way people mean when they say that. She was going to be fine in the real way, the slower way, the way that required walking through the full truth of what had happened and what it had cost and who had seen her and who had not. She was going to carry her grandmother forward in the way she lived, in the choices she made, in the clarity she allowed herself to have about what she deserved and what she would accept. That felt like the truest way to honor her. She was 30 years old, and she had just watched someone who loved her fight for her from a hospice bed and win. She had learned that being the strong one did not protect you from being taken from. She had learned that being quiet too long could be read as permission. She had learned that documenting things was not paranoia, it was self-respect in written form. She had learned that confronting the people who had hurt her from a place of clarity and calm was more powerful than any version of the scene she might have made. She had learned that not every relationship that mattered to you would give you what you needed, and that accepting that was not defeat, it was Esty. She had learned that some debts were financial, and some were emotional, and some were the kind that could only ever be partially repaid, and she had decided she could live with that. She had also learned something quieter and maybe more important. She had learned that the people who see you, really see you, are worth every early morning and every long drive and every 2-hour visit and every cup of ginger tea. She had learned that showing up for someone who cannot show up for themselves is not weakness. It is the purest form of love. And she had learned that sometimes that love comes back to you at the moment you need it most, from the direction you least expected, in the form of one phone call from a woman with a cell phone and a lawyer's number and 30 years of watching you and knowing exactly who you were. Emily did not need her family to understand that. She knew it herself, and that was enough. If Emily's story touched something real in you, I want to hear from you in the comments. Have you ever been the dependable one, the stable one, the person everyone assumed could handle it, only to find out that your reliability had been quietly treated as permission to need you less? Have you ever had someone fight for you when you did not know you needed fighting for? Tell me about it below. Emily's story is about one woman finding her footing after being taken from by the people she trusted most, but the truth inside it belongs to a lot of people. If that truth is yours too, say so. And if you know someone who needs to hear a story like this right now, share this with them. Sometimes the most powerful thing you can do for someone who is too quiet about their own pain is to show them they are not alone in it.